All right, folks, welcome back to another edition of the Fitz News Month in Review. This is where we do it live, so if we screw up, we have absolutely no excuses. You get to watch all the fun unfold as it happens here. A lot to cover this week. If you saw the promo intro, you saw the images of Susan Smith. This is a case notorious across the country back in the mid 1990s. There's some developments in that story we're going to cover extensively here today. But before we get to that, a bit of breaking news. As we are going live today, right outside me here in the Midlands region of South Carolina, there is a manhunt underway for an individual out of Tennessee, the Smoky Mountains. There was an attempted murder there. A body was called in by an individual who claimed to have been running from a bear and fallen off a cliff. They gave the name Brandon Andrade to authorities, and when they arrived on the scene of this accident, they found a deceased individual with identification bearing this person's name. The only problem wasn't Brandon Andrade, folks. It was an unidentified individual, and they have since located the suspect in that murder here in South Carolina, literally right around the corner from where we are in the town of Chapin, South Carolina. That's a lake community about 22 miles to the northwest of the state capital of Columbia. So if you see anybody coming through the window here during the broadcast, folks, that's all it is, just a fugitive on the loose here in the Midlands region of the state. By the way, if we do get any updates on that while we're broadcasting live, we will be sure to let you know what's going on with that case. But again, U.S. Marshals currently searching for that individual. His name is Nicholas Wayne Hamlet. He's from Alabama, where he was wanted for attempted murder and a parole violation, now wanted for murder out of the state of Tennessee and at large here in our backyard. We'll keep you posted on that. Also, wanted to just quickly update you. A lot of folks have come to Fitz News to get the very latest on the Murdoch murders, crime, and corruption saga. Obviously, that's a story that was making international waves a year ago. The press has calmed down a bit on the story. It hasn't really been front page news on our outlet for a while, but there was a development yesterday related to that case. The South Carolina Supreme Court issued a ruling denying a bid by one of the jurors in the Murdoch trial, the one who was controversially dismissed at the 11th hour on the morning of the verdicts. Myra Crosby, the egg juror, if you are familiar with the story. Myra Crosby had sought to have records released related to her dismissal from this case. Her attorney, Joe McCulloch, had sought those records. The state of South Carolina opposed their release. And just this week, the South Carolina Supreme Court sided with the state and has refused to release those records. Now, we don't know if this is part of a bigger issue related to Alec Murdaugh's appeal, which will begin moving forward in December of this year, or what the deal is. But for the moment, anyway, a defeat for transparency. And by the way, for those of you who have been following this case, charges against Becky Hill, the clerk of court accused of tampering with the Murdoch jury, we're still waiting on them. Still no charges. So we will obviously continue to track the case, but we have entered into a strange phase of the Murdoch drama where a lot of the folks who were wearing the white hats at the beginning now seem to be circling the wagons to try and protect a verdict that I think anyone with a rudimentary understanding of the Sixth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution would argue is fatally flawed. But anyway, we'll get to that in a little bit. We got some to talk about that, but our big story today is the story of Susan Smith. And there's a little bit of context here because there's also something happening today as we film this show, folks. Tonight at 6 o'clock, the South Carolina Department of Corrections is scheduled to execute Richard Bernard Moore. This is an inmate who has been on death row for the past 2 decades. Our media outlet has been covering his case. I wrote a big column on it earlier this week. We also had a guest column arguing for clemency for inmate Moore. He is unlikely to receive that, but this is a case that a lot of folks have argued was not ripe for death penalty consideration. Did it meet the statutory factors that would lead the state to pursue a death penalty? Yes, it did. However, some argued that because Moore was unarmed when he initiated the robbery, he should not have been, or prosecutors rather, should not have pursued the death penalty against him. My argument, pushing back at that, is, hey, you bust in somebody's store trying to steal their property, and he did, in fact, steal over $1,400 in that robbery. What do the kids say? F-A-F-O, Dylan? Dylan's in agreement. But at any rate, that case, a lot of folks believe it was on the line for the death penalty. But the Susan Smith case And Jen Wood, I want to bring you in here now. The Susan Smith case is one where the death penalty was sought by prosecutor Tommy Pope, who is now the Speaker Pro Tem of the South Carolina House of Representatives. But Jen, you interviewed Tommy recently, earlier this year, as this case was starting to heat up. First of all, tell us, why are we talking about Susan Smith here in November 2024?
Well, because she has a parole hearing scheduled November 20th, which we will be attending and providing coverage of. So 30 years later, she is now eligible for parole. And that's because the law changed shortly, I want to say 6 months after she was convicted in January of 1996, where in certain crimes, life means life. But when she was convicted, a life sentence, regardless of the crime, was eligible for parole at 30 years.
Yeah, indeed. And obviously, for those of you who saw the life sentences that Alec Murdoch received, those are life sentences. There's no possibility of parole. But as you point out, Jen, that law was changed in the immediate aftermath of Susan Smith's conviction back in July of 1995. Jen, prosecutors sought the death penalty in this case against Susan Smith. Let's give a little bit of the context of this crime. Walk us through this case. Give us a little background on what Susan Smith did, and again, ultimately why she didn't receive the death penalty. Give us some background on the case.
So Susan Smith, young mother from Union County, South Carolina. Union, it's in the northern part of the state. She, in 1994, 95, was driving. She claimed she was driving through Union, which I cannot emphasize what a small town this is. I think there's like 3 stoplights. And at one of the stoplights, she had her 2 children in the back seat in their car seats, and she was carjacked. And for, over a week, she was selling that narrative that her kids were in the car while it was carjacked, and her kids were missing. She was on TV crying, and eventually it came to, she confessed that she had taken her kids to the lake nearby and taken the parking brake off the car and let them roll into the lake and drown.
Indeed, and shortly after that confession, divers with the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources made that awful discovery about 122 feet from the shore of the John D. Long Lake up there in Union County, South Carolina, the bodies of the 2 children of Susan Smith, Michael and Alex, just 2 adorable young kids, one of them 3 years old, one of them a little over a year. Just awful. And again, Jen, not just any carjacker. Susan Smith kind of played a race card back then, didn't she? She said it was a black carjacker.
She sure did.
And you mentioned you were talking with Tommy Pope. I give him a lot of credit. Tommy Pope is a guy, he and I have disagreed politically on stuff before. I've called him out on Fitz News before, but he deserves a lot of credit, I think, here, because when he sought the death penalty, well, you've got a clip of that, don't you, Jen? Or Dylan, somebody's got a clip of that where we can talk about Tommy Pope and his decision to seek the death penalty. Let's take a look at that if we got that able to pull up. Here is Solicitor Tommy Pope talking about his decision to seek the death penalty against Susan Smith.
If somebody I love did not love me, I sunk to my lowest when I let the boys go down the ramp without me. Well, the good news is that it connects that it wasn't the black guy, and that she was involved.
Hang on.
Looks like we're having some difficulties. Bear with us, folks. We apologize. Jen has a power outage, by the way, in Louisiana, so bear with us.
Banning myself and.
All right, here's the clip of Solicitor Pope. Sorry about that, y'all.
Well, while we wait for that, we'll just go ahead and let you know Tommy Pope made an incredibly difficult decision on this case. seeking the death penalty against a woman who was well known in that community. And one of the things he said in seeking it was that he felt that had Susan Smith's story been true, had a black man carjacked her and taken her children and killed them, everyone in that county, everyone in the state would have been clamoring for the death penalty. And I think it's an absolutely fair point. You know, what's good for the goose? Here we go. Let's play it, Dylan. All right. Well, we're obviously having some technical difficulties, folks, so we're going to come back to that clip later. But, Jen, let's talk a little bit more about this case. I mean, this is a case that made international news. In fact, this was a story that was as big, if not bigger, than the Murdochs when it happened. This was something that people from all over the country came to cover. But let's talk a little bit about the flip side of this. Obviously, I think all of us, I don't want to speak for everybody here, but I certainly agree that seeking the death penalty in this case against Susan Smith was the right decision. It's unfortunate Tommy Pope was unable to get that death penalty secured against Susan Smith. But Jen, walk us through the reasons why Susan Smith did not get the death penalty. She's had quite a background leading up to this crime. Walk us through some of that.
She did. So she, as part of the case that the defense presented, it turns out she had for years been sexually abused by her stepfather, and that relationship was ongoing even up until the time of the crime. So that was a big part of, their defense and the reasoning behind her mental illness. That she, it was really interesting. And this jury was a Union County jury. That's a very, very small county. Everybody knows everybody. I mean, think of how small Hampton was when we were trying Alex Murdoch in Colleton. Exactly the same setup. So, I mean, people were familiar with this family, familiar with the circumstances.
Yeah, her stepfather, an individual by the name of Beverly C. Russell, very active in local politics up there, part of the South Carolina Republican Party, also part of the Christian Coalition, which was a very powerful entity in South Carolina politics at the time. Also, Susan Smith's own father committed suicide when she was 6 years old. One of the things her attorney said, and I found this quote just a minute ago, was a very interesting argument. They said, "This case is not about evil. This case is about despair and sadness." And Jen, obviously that argument wasn't going to hold the day when it related to the facts of the case and the murders themselves, but it did appear to hold the day over the death penalty issue. And obviously that jury which convicted her ultimately found that she did not deserve to die in their estimation as it relates to these crimes. But let's talk now about her bid for parole. Obviously, we are now less than 3 weeks away from that hearing, which we'll be covering. We'll bring you that hearing live and commentary as it unfolds. But Jen, let's talk about Susan Smith's record since she's been incarcerated. Has she been a model inmate? Does she have a case to make that she should be set free?
Absolutely not. I mean, she has been a hot mess. She had sex with prison guards. She ended up getting an STD. She had sex with other inmates. She's had romantic dalliances with her pen pals. And you can even see that, I had just did a FOIA just to kind of see what was going on in the months leading up to her parole hearing. And she was communicating with multiple men. They had little nicknames for each other. And she just got in trouble in August for communicating with a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker.
Just like Alec Murdoch.
All that stuff is going to play. Yeah.
These two deserve each other, it sounds like. Susan Smith and Alec Murdoch. It's like a match made in hell.
That's a scary thought.
Well, I'm happy to report here that I believe my IT problem has been resolved. If we want to watch this clip of Solicitor Pope talking about the death penalty and the decision whether to go for that and how that went.
All right, well, let's hear the clip.
I consider Smith an unsuccessful prosecution for me because I was, seeking the ultimate punishment. And, people, same thing now, but it's on steroids. People say, oh, he's doing that for attention, or he's doing that for this, or he's doing that for that. And, but I really felt that had there been the African-American carjacker, there would have been an outrage if I did not seek the death penalty. If there had been David Smith, the father, had taken the lives of the children, the same would have occurred. And so even knowing that in South Carolina, we rarely gave the death penalty to females, I just felt that whatever the maximum penalty was, I felt that she deserved that. And I always tried to explain to people too, you had David Ruck and Judy Clark on the other side, and they are tremendous anti-death penalty advocates. And they want to avert, avoid the death penalty at all costs. They don't really care as much about guilt and innocence or anything else. That's their mission, and I respect that. I'm not the yin to that yang. I didn't wake up every day, bloodthirsty and can't wait to execute somebody. It was really more, I always viewed my role as the prosecutor more like someone in the military. I was willing to do what was required of me, but it didn't mean I relished it, because I'm human, and I believe in my Christian beliefs of forgiveness and compassion and all that are still there, but I had a job to do. So short version, I always felt like one thing that unfolded that I thought was unfortunate is that Susan Smith, being a white female that remind us of our sister or our co-worker or our paralegal here at the law firm, whatever, it was unsettling on many different levels. And I think law enforcement, to a certain extent, at least some in law enforcement, beginning with the sheriff, who was actually her godfather, he had a relationship, with that family. They didn't treat it quite the same ultimately, when you reference the confession, as they would have if it had been a different defendant.
Yeah, just a great point there, Jen, about why he ended up making that decision. And it's important to point out, this wasn't just the murder of 2 children. It was a massive lie that prompted law enforcement resources to be devoted to a week and a half long search for a phantom carjacker. And just
premeditation. It was just, she pushed that, and like he said, she pushed that car into the water. And when she went to the house to report the kidnapping, walked to the house, she didn't have a drop of water on her. She didn't even try to get in the water to get them out. So, it was just horrific.
Yeah, it's just an unbelievable case. I believe the Fitz News poll that we conducted back in February this year, when we last in-depth addressed this story, overwhelmingly against Susan Smith receiving parole. I don't think there's anybody who is going to take the wager that she's going to be granted parole. But anyway, we will be at that hearing regardless. Jen, you've done amazing work on this Susan Smith story. Thank you for digging into this. It's one that desperately needs to be told and continue to be told. And certainly in the context of the death penalty in South Carolina, a quick note, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the process, if there is a guilty plea in a murder trial where the death penalty was sought, in South Carolina, it is up to the judge to determine the sentence. As you saw at the Murdoch case, Judge Newman determined the sentence for Alec Murdoch, even though that was a death penalty case. But if it is a trial and someone is found guilty in a death penalty case, it is the jury that convicted that individual that gets to decide, not the judge. So an interesting nuance there, and there are multiple aggravating factors. And just like the murder itself, for the death penalty to be imposed, those aggravating factors must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So we will keep everybody in the loop on that Susan Smith case. Also, for those of you who are following the Richard Bernard Moore execution scheduled for tonight, we'll have coverage of that later today as well. But I want to shift gears now to a story that has really dominated our coverage this past month. And this is a month in review, so we're going back to the month of October and looking at all the stories that we covered. And there is no story that we covered that was more impactful, that was followed more closely, that gripped at people's heartstrings more than the unfolding humanitarian disaster in Western North Carolina. Our Andy Fancher has made multiple trips up to Western North Carolina. He joins us now. He was with Dylan Nolan on his most recent trip. And Andy, your coverage of this has been exemplary. I got to say, it's been so good that I think you've got some admirers in the mainstream media, but also a few haters in the mainstream press. You had a kind of a rough week this week, Andy. You took it on the chin a bit from some media outlets up in North Carolina. Give us a little background on some of the criticism you've been getting, bud.
Sure. So as you mentioned here, we've made quite a few friends in Western North Carolina as well as South Carolina, our mainstream affiliate brethren. To put it in brevity, I've been censored 3 times on Facebook. I've been fact-checked by 2 different MSM affiliates, one Fox, one NPR, and at the end of the day, I can't help but wear it as a badge of honor. I mean, there's nothing a lie hates worse than the truth, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're telling the truth, we're amplifying the truth. As somebody who has worked at an NBC affiliate myself, I can attest, these outlets are committed to alliances and biases that don't give a damn about you unless you're bleeding, which is why I'm reporting with such certainty that something is being overlooked here in Appalachia, because we have a mass casualty event, potentially worse than Katrina, that's being overlooked. And if these folks were to spend half as much time reporting the facts of this case rather than fact-checking me, they could be saving lives, So,
You saying they got blood on their hands, Fancher?
Why not? Why not call it what it is? MSM has the ability to be an unsinkable ship, but they insist on running it right into an iceberg. So as it relates to the story on the ground, because as you mentioned, we have been doing this thing going on 3-4 weeks now. I've camped out in the mountains of Western North Carolina with Marines. Dylan and I have slept on the floors of some volunteers' homes. It has been a magnificent experience. It's been an overwhelming experience, one of tragedy and miracle in the same breath. So, as for the scene in Western North Carolina, I'll kick right off with the latest news. The Buncombe County Tourism Department Authority, or TDA, they kicked up quite a bit of controversy this week by urging people to get back to tourism in Buncombe County. This despite the fact that main thoroughfares, we're talking miles of Interstate 40 as well as others, are still untraversable. We've got a water authority that is attesting to contaminants in the water supply. They noted that they're, referring to my notes here, their Norfolk Reservoir was overturned. It was turned upside down following this storm. So we've got, according to the Buncombe County Permit Office that I reached out to specifically, we've got at least 35% of properties that they've inspected wholly unlivable at this point. Yet the tourism board is steadfast on avoiding an economic disaster by encouraging folks to come up and tour. Quite honestly, I think that people should see the aftermath of this storm, because there's no way that you could return home with a clean conscience. Now, as it relates to the mud, dust, and sludge that MSM, to their credit, is reporting on as well, I didn't myself realize the magnanimity of the potential toxins in that mud until I was messaged just last night. Somebody asked me if I had heard of first responders, of those involved in search, rescue, and recovery teams falling sick, or in some cases dying. And then that reminded me that on my second to last trip back, I too felt quite lightheaded for about a day and a half. I didn't think much of it until I got this message. then I started reaching out to folks that we still have on the ground. I say folks we have on the ground, to contacts on the ground, to SARS teams that are still involved in the search, rescue, and recovery efforts. And they noted that they're having to ration how much time they can go out for, that cadaver dogs are falling sick. And in fact, just last month, it wasn't widely reported, but it was put out that Mountain True, an environmental conservation group, they tested the mud out there, and they determined that there are compounds in that mud that is now turning into dust that you don't want in your body. So it's a horrific scene, a horrific sight. And again, it is still one of miracle as well, because point to me any other place in the country where you would see neighbor helping neighbor, communities helping communities to the degree that Western North Carolina has following this storm. It has been amazing to see. Dylan and I had the fortunate ability to sit down with some of these folks, just one sect of generator suppliers who maintain that they have distributed power from Asheville to eastern Tennessee. And if possible, only because I don't know how to do it, Dylan, can we toss to that clip now on two folks that we have been following for the past couple of weeks? I met Trey O'Hara. He is a carpenter by trade during my first trip up to Western North Carolina, and he introduced us to Angel, who professes to being the generator girl. And this is, of course, a smaller point to a much larger project we're working on. Folks who may have viewed our last week in review heard from these individuals, but this is a new edit, this is a new perspective, a new side, and more to just the rebuilding Appalachia road ahead. If we can roll this clip.
The main thing that we're doing is helping the people from the devastation of the hurricane. We had generators shipped in here from the airport, and the electricians are going out and wiring up the generators for the people that have no power. People without power, of course, have no heat. It snowed here Wednesday, and they were freezing. People came in with their little children, just shivering. We've offered jackets, we've offered blankets. It's gonna take a while for something to be normal here again. His generator's already restored, so take a picture of this right here.
It's no smiling, no laughing matter. You know, there's a bunch of held back tears around here. Here, I'm also helping out, and that is to hook up the generators to get power back to the houses that don't have power. And every day I go out, and it's amazing how much damage was done. This is my first time here, and man, I am in awe. There's a bunch of stuff down, but it's still beautiful, even in all the mess, you know? I've met some wonderful people, but God bless you, sir. I would gladly trade those friendships for this to never have happened. But we're past that now. Now what?
So
Man,
just
that's great, Andy.
I
That's great
appreciate
work.
that, man. That's Dylan's help as well. Those are some of his shots in there too. I was notified that my mic might be echoing. Does it help if I hold it up here? Does that do anything at all, y'all?
That sounds good to me, man.
All right, sounds
good.
better. So, yeah, I mean, that's the scene on the ground. That's what's happening. That's what MSM isn't showing us, is that we've got folks from, last week I said folks from as far as Oregon. That's changed. Now we've got folks from as far as Alaska reaching out to us, asking how on earth they could help. We have a live feed up. We can help service offerings to North Carolina, where we are, upon the express permission of folks reaching out, uploading their contact information to our live feed, and that is exactly what it is. It remains live, and it is feeding, right? Now, to one of the more controversial points of this storm is if the hurricane itself didn't bring a hurricane of misinformation, and controversy. I mean, just look at what has happened to our reportings. You know, I'm not inclined to trust MSM at this point, especially when we know that their fact checkers are repeating rather than reporting. So I referred to a researcher that I actually met along the way out there, Nico Karaku, and he actually cited me in an exhaustive article that he finished just this week. He actually asked me to do some revisions and advising on it. He, of course, lives up in North Carolina, and he brought a rather interesting perspective to the fatality debacle. And I want to read a portion of that report. I'm going to pull it up here. Now, this relates to, again, what I consider underreported fatalities. While, of course, nobody can answer that question except folks in places that we might never know, right? He did reach out to some officials out that way, and this is what he came back with. What's not included in the state's death toll of 101, however, are missing persons, bodies that washed into other states, and those with an unknown cause of death. According to North Carolina statutes on the estates of missing persons, 7 years must elapse before a missing person is officially considered dead, meaning if no body is found, which seems possible considering how many have been found buried under massive mud and debris piles, the state will count them as official will not count them as storm deaths potentially for another 7 years.
Wow.
So talk about prolonging the tragedy, right? It's something beyond words, as him and I, as well as other writers out that way, have agreed. I mean, how do you tell this story? There's no way to tell an all-encompassing story of Helene. There's no way to emphasize just how much Appalachia's bleeding. But if there's one thing we can deduce from being on ground and speaking with tons of people at this point, it's that while mountaineers might not ask for your help, they do need it.
Indeed. And Andy, I want some context for our audience. It's important to point out that the numbers that you've been citing, I mean, hell, you showed me one county alone, the rolls. We've had folks go on film talking about body bags stacked 5 feet high, 35 feet deep. Seen that with their own eyes. We've been forwarded pictures of some of the bodies in those body bags. We've had a group, this group that's got some division in it now, but you know, they were officially putting out these statistics at least until their leader apparently broke ranks from the grassroots in that organization. There's a bitter division within that nonprofit up there in Western North Carolina. Again, we don't get in a pissing match here. We're all trying to find the same thing, but the point is, you're not pulling these numbers out of your ass. These are from people who are on the ground watching what's happening, and to have these, you know, NPR fact checkers, you know, getting talking points from, you know, from the DC Fishbowl. You know, I trust your judgment far more than theirs. But hey, man, like you said, it's a badge of honor, Fancher. Badge of honor.
Well, you know, if we were committed to clickbait, then I'd put out, you know, 90% or 99% of the unsubstantiated things that have been told to us by people on the ground. You know, what I find so humorous, you know, I consider myself just a little law enforcement auditor with a laptop here at Fitz News, right? But that being said, if you're going to call a cop a liar, you better have your receipts in line. So that's what I want to do on a daily here. That's obviously what I enjoy doing on a daily here. So yeah, we didn't just go up to Western North Carolina haphazardly and report the first thing that we heard. No, yeah. In fact, I sat quietly for over a week. I called countless people who talk about being traumatically familiar with this fatality, with this mass casualty event. It took several days across multiple first responders to put out the number that we did on Buncombe County. We're not saying that 140 plus died in Buncombe County, but according to folks out that way, that's how many were found.
Correct.
Now,
No,
as
and that's a good distinction. And you've also got, we have no idea what the Airbnb population was up there. I mean, hell, my family had one booked for the week after this storm. There are a ton of people that were going up there that time of year. And as you mentioned, Andy, we know there's North Carolinians still unaccounted for. We don't know how many from other states are unaccounted for. But I'll tell you one thing, man, the work that you've done, not only trying to dig into the numbers behind this tragedy, but I think as we're starting to do now, telling the stories of those impacted, telling the stories of those helping. And Andy, you got a piece coming next week that's going to touch on that, if I'm not mistaken?
that is correct. So, at Fitz News, we love our franchises and our alliterations. Badge Gone Bad, Pervert on Patrol, Murdoch Murders. No, I'm with you, man. I'm with you. But unfortunately, the magnum opus does not have a title yet, but it is being efforted, and you will hear from some, if you've been following our coverage, you will hear from some familiar voices. You will see some familiar faces, as well as some, hopefully, new statistics and new individuals as well. We're keeping close tabs with the folks that we have had the fortunate pleasure of meeting and who we can now call our friends out Western North Carolina way. They are providing us updates. I kid you not, Will. They are providing us updates on an hourly basis. So while we may be back now in South Carolina, we certainly remain in North Carolina in spirits. And as far as our reporting is concerned, it's unfettered by the fact-checking repeaters who clearly have not even made half of the number of phone calls that I have, or even 20%. So, count on us to keep on the Appalachian apocalypse. There's our alliteration again. Because it's just the effect that it's left on me alone. I had never smelled death until I went to Western North Carolina, until I went to Lake Lure. And sure, folks maintain that there's no odor of death there, but those who challenge that, walk up the Swananoa River. You will smell some things, and you will hear some things, and you may even see some things that you never expected to in your life. Lord knows that I didn't, covering this storm. We have been provided photos of bodies, plural at this point, which we have no intention of publishing. That's someone's family. That is someone's father, someone's mother. And who are we to publish that kind of receipt? So that's where we are. That is Appalachia.
Well, keep us posted, Brother Fancher. Excellent work up there, man, and we will be looking forward to next week's piece on the folks lending their helping hands to this. Well, man, there's some alliteration for you.
There you go.
We'll see if that passes the test. But Andy, great work, man, and Dylan, excellent work on your part going up there with him and lending your helping hands to the effort to get this down on film. We've got a ton of great film on this. Andy's piece will probably highlight some more of that, but looking forward very much to continuing to roll out the footage and the sound and the images of everything that we have seen up there. Want to shift gears now to a story back here in South Carolina, closer to home. In fact, just this morning, I took one of my boys out for breakfast. We were walking into one of the local Lizard's Thicket restaurants, and there was a poster on the wall asking for information about Zelig Williams. And my son pointed at it and says, "Dad, that's the guy that was on your website." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, he's been on a lot of websites." Callie Lyons joins us, one of our researcher reporters. Callie has been on this case from the very beginning. Zelig Williams, of course, the 28-year-old Broadway star, was in MJ the Musical, was in Hamilton, toured the world with Hugh Jackman, just an accomplished dancer, somebody with deep ties here in South Carolina. A lot of the folks in the local studios who've known us and worked with us in the past just love this young man. Callie, give us an update on Zelig's case. It has been almost a month since he was last seen. Is that correct?
That's right. He went missing on October the 3rd from his mother's home. He drove off, and that's the last that anyone has seen from him. Now, his phone did ping a short time after he left home, and it pinged out an SOS alert telling some friends in New York City that he had perhaps been involved in an accident. But when his car was located, there was no damage to indicate that that was the case. Now, the term Zelig means a chameleon, somebody who's easily adaptable into any situation. And the way he's vanished, it's like he's vanished into the ether. So, in some ways, his name could also, define the way that he has seemingly vanished. It's interesting that though people continue to search, there have been no further sightings, and we really have evidence at all as to what has happened to him at this point in time.
Kelly, let me ask you a question about this story, because in a lot of these cases, there is hyper focus on one area. In this case, there is hyper focus on two areas, and one group, law enforcement, seems to be focused on one area. The private investigator working on behalf of Z's family is focused on another area. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Law enforcement has been focused on the area where his car was recovered. That would be along the Palmetto Trail, about 20 miles, a little more than 20 miles from home. The private investigator in this case, who's been working with the family, is focused on the area where his phone pinged out that SOS alert, which is really the only, outstanding mysterious key that we have to his disappearance at this point in time. And that occurred much closer to his home, within 10 or 20 minutes of him leaving the house. So that occurred on Old Garner's Ferry Road, where there has not been nearly as much searching going on as out at Palmetto Trail where his car was recovered.
And Kelly, one of the things that you've mentioned in your reporting is that when his car was recovered, all of his clothes and his sandals were in the vehicle. Is that correct?
Yeah, his belongings were in the car.
Everything but his phone,
To the
right?
mystery. Right,
Yeah,
at this point, we've heard a lot of conflicting reports as to the phone, but it appears we don't know where the phone is at this point in time.
So the phone's gone, Z's gone, the car has been located, all of his clothes were in the car, and police are looking in one spot where the car was found, and the family's looking where this SOS ping was found. Kelly, let me ask you this about this story. One of the things I really respect about your coverage of this story is that you have gone where the documents lead. You've gone where the narrative leads, and you've uncovered a lot of things that indicated, Z may have been struggling with his sexuality. There's a potential religious component to this. The family very eager to stress his religious background. Let me ask you this, Callie, is the search for Z also in the background accompanied by an attempt to kind of define this individual?
I think that's fair to say. And it's true. He's a very spiritual being. You can tell that from his, he's done a number of videos. He had a podcast. He had this internal struggle over his sexuality that he felt did not line up with his spirituality. So we know that caused him to leave Broadway last December. And that's where he had always wanted to be. So you can see the struggle play out in his life, and you have to wonder, that play a part in his disappearance? At this point, we just don't know.
And Callie, I think you've got a clip. I don't know how long it is, but there was some comments made. Dylan's pulling it up here for us. There were some comments made at a press conference by the sheriff of Richland County that referenced closure in this case. And let's listen to that clip real quick, and then we'll talk about what it could mean.
I want to thank all the media for being here today, because you play a very important part in bringing closure to this family.
Oh yeah, closure right off the bat, complete with the "God is dope" shirt. Interesting. We don't have those at my Lutheran church, but man, maybe we need to get some. But Callie, obviously, closure for a lot of folks implies that this is not necessarily a search, but perhaps a recovery type situation. That's certainly what a lot of folks who heard that comment took from it. However, we did reach out to the sheriff, and as you reported, Sheriff Leon Lott himself indicated there was no information.
And y'all, if I might jump in here, I was the one who went over to that press conference and filmed that. And so, of course, you know, before any of these things start, you're always talking to the other members of the media who are there to cover it. And we were all kind of wondering, all right, they called us here, we're doing a press conference. Is there going to be some new information revealed? And it really ended up being a press conference to humanize Mr. Williams' family and try to encourage people who might have information to step forward. But despite it being something where Sheriff Lott, you know, the next 2 minutes after that 26 seconds that we played there are him talking about how this is not a press conference for new information. But that one word was the thing that, you know, I think all of us left that building saying, did he say closure?
Yeah. No doubt. That's a great observation, Dylan. And I tell you what, we are now, as Callie mentioned, October 3rd was the last day Z was seen. We are now in November, almost a month that he has been gone, and with each passing day, you know, the odds grow longer, and certainly concern continues to elevate. But Callie, excellent work on this story. Please keep us posted if there's any new developments. And again, for those looking for information on this, fitsnews.com, we've got you covered. But as I mentioned at the open, Z's story has been everywhere. In fact, Hugh Jackman himself personally made an appeal for him to be found safe. But Callie, excellent work. Please keep us posted.
Thank you.
All right, so we are now going to shift our attention to what will probably be the focus of the next month in review, depending on how things shake out, but the 2024 election season. And Dylan Nolan, I'm going to get you to hop in here to talk a little bit about this. We've been tracking it, talking about it. We've actually got a great interview scheduled for tomorrow with a guest. I'm not going to leak the name yet, but it's going to be a big one. It's an interview with an individual that has some insights that folks should really pay attention to as it relates to where this race is and where it could potentially go over the next couple of days. But that individual will be coming in our studio tomorrow. Can't wait to air that interview. We've also got election night coverage coming up. We're going to talk about it in a second. But Dylan, as we look at the state of this race right now, a week ago it seemed Trump pulling ahead in swing states, seeming to have the advantage in not only the swing state he won last year, but many of the ones he didn't win. Kamala Harris over the last few days has been inching back, particularly in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, which are three states that, let's be honest, she wins those three, it's game over.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, we spend all this time looking at the polling numbers, and they really show that this is a knife's-edge race, and that's evidenced by the fact that both of these campaign surrogates and even the candidates themselves are out here speaking very confidently of their victory, and honestly, both of them have reason to do so.
Okay, well, we'll make the case. Why do Trump surrogates have reason to make that bold statement that he's going to win?
Well, right now I'm looking at the Real Clear Politics average, which if folks don't know is a rolling average of the most recent polls from, you know, reputable as pollsters get, pollsters. And right now Trump is leading in the popular vote, the national vote, which
Wow.
if that is accurate, the odds that he sweeps the Electoral College and has a resounding victory are very high. For folks that don't know, in the last couple of election cycles, and this goes back for even more than just the last couple, but the Democrat model is based on having popular vote victories, and the Republican model is based on winning on the Electoral College. So if that is upended, I mean, this is going to be dramatically bad for Harris. We've heard internal polling from both camps suggest that Trump is certainly doing well, but as you say, these key swing states, she still has a fighting chance in. And Trump, going into this week, had almost gotten to a 70-30 set of odds in betting markets, which is real people putting real money down on who's going to win this presidential race. And just over the last 12 hours, he's taken almost a 20-point slide to it being right back to a coin toss, which is really interesting because we had this delta for most of this month between the polls and where people were willing to put their money. But it seems as though the gap between those two is really tightening up. And it is what folks who have been looking at internal polling, folks who really understand the dynamics of this race have been saying for months, which is this is a race on a knife's edge. It's a race that's going to be determined by which of these parties' operatives can turn out their voters and turn out folks who maybe aren't usually their voters, but who can be convinced to vote in this election.
You mentioned a knife's edge. Let's talk for a moment about a knife in the back. South Carolina's own Nikki Haley, former governor of the Palmetto State, former UN ambassador appointed by Trump back in 2017. Nikki Haley, who has been very quiet after losing to Trump in the Republican primary earlier this year, came out this week with some comments accusing Trump and his vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, of being part of a bromance and of using language that was off-putting to women voters, basically calling Trump out for not reaching out to her and using her on the campaign trail, really going public with her criticism of Trump's campaign at a pivotal moment. And Dylan, not only the timing of Nikki's comments toward Trump, but the focus of those comments, hitting him where it hurts on the female voters. What are your thoughts on Nikki weighing in here at the last minute and sticking that little dagger of hers in Trump's back?
I mean, after she stuck the big dagger in him, which is running a presidential race, I respect anybody that wants to run and say, I'm going to be the best person to be the president of the United States. But she made it clear that she was more so an enemy of Donald Trump than a friend of herself when she had no clear path to victory and continued to run in that presidential primary just to disparage him and to drag him down for, at least 5 states longer than she probably should have if she was legitimately just running for herself. So the idea that she wouldn't at the last minute here, et tu, Nikki, it's not overly surprising here.
Well, we'll have to see what sort of impact that might have. We have seen numbers which indicate that early voters are disproportionately female, although we have also seen numbers indicating that the Republican percentage of the early vote, at least in the states where party identification is tracked in terms of voter registration, we have seen indications that the Republican early vote turnout has been much stronger than it has been in previous elections. Here in South Carolina, early voting off the chain, more than 1.2 million people have cast ballots already. We've still got several days of early voting to go here in South Carolina, 2 more days actually. So we are looking at potential for up to more than a third, perhaps as much as 40%.
Y'all read, Will?
Of the turnout from the 2020 presidential election already in the bank, Dylan. So early voting, a huge factor here. I'm looking forward to our guests tomorrow weighing in on who they believe that might benefit. But Dylan, what are your thoughts on the early voting phenomenon? Who do you think it's helping this cycle?
It's interesting. I hear a lot of people speaking about the women early voting as if that's a key indication that they're Democrats. But if you break down women by whether they're married, by their race, women are not the same. There's huge differences in how different groups of women from different backgrounds in this country vote. And so I don't think one can make a dispositive argument one way or the other that women voting early means that they're a bunch of Democrats or a bunch of Republicans. And even in these situations where you'll say, okay, the Republicans have a lead in early voting, oftentimes you'll see like the Republicans are here, the Democrats are here, and then the people who are not affiliated are like right there. So that means that there's a huge group of people who we just can't make accurate predictions about right now. And people in our profession this time of every election cycle love to read into the early voting data and to try to read the tea leaves as to where it's going. But I would caution anybody who's looking at a take on social media, in a newspaper, wherever it is, that says that they can tell you 100% how this thing's going to go by early voting data. All I would say is if you've got a candidate which you're passionate about getting into the White House, go out and vote. And, it's time to participate in the process where the day of decision is nigh. But it's very difficult to tell, based off the tea leaves that we have available to us, how this thing's going to shake out.
By the way, I do want to mention we get a little flack at Fitz News. Some folks on the social media have said that we are not kind to Kamala Harris. I don't know. I'm a libertarian who doesn't believe in price controls and authoritarianism, so I don't know why I'm supposed to be kind here, but to a candidate who supports those things. But I want to give some credit where credit is due to Kamala Harris's campaign. They've got a ton of money. They have not always been spending it wisely, but they have a commercial out. Two women going into the voting booth with their conservative Republican husbands, and the two women in the secrecy and privacy of that voting booth kind of look over at each other and kind of wink at each other and nod and cast their ballots for Kamala, and then walk back out to their conservative Republican husbands and put on their MAGA hats. So it was a very nifty ad seeking to target some of those potentially undecided female voters. And I also want to point something out. I had a conversation with a undecided female voter in the upstate here in South Carolina who indicated that they finally, after a lot of thought, ended up voting for Harris. And I sort of probed them a little bit and said, well, what was your deciding factor? And they sent back one word: Rovember. Rovember. That's a reference to the overturning of Roe v. Wade recently and efforts by states to restrict abortion access. Wherever you are on that issue, it is certainly one that is undeniably driving female voters in the direction of Kamala Harris. And even here in South Carolina, as I mentioned, anecdotally having some conversations to that effect. Dylan, we are now almost 48 hours away from this race. We are incredibly close. As we look at what's moving people here at the last minute, I don't want to pull my garbage can out here, but we had an incident this past week. Yeah, that garbage can's full. I won't bring that out. God knows what's in there. But the word garbage, huge in this race. And it started at a Trump rally in New York, didn't it? Walk us through this garbage gate.
Yeah, if anyone's familiar with the old Comedy Central roast that they used to do, you ever watch any of those? They did one of Charlie Sheen that was hugely popular. They even did one of Donald Trump back when he was just a celebrity. But Tony Hinchcliffe is a comedian who is like one of these roast masters. So he's a guy who just goes up there and tells very insulting, degrading. I mean, he's a talented comedian, but it certainly was an interesting choice, a week before a presidential election, because this guy's whole shtick, and I think he's funny, he's good at it, but is roasting the hell out of people. So he's going up there. I mean, he's firing shots. I think that he said the word blacks, Jews, the Puerto Ricans. It's just, and apparently the Trump campaign reviewed this material before, but the joke that got a 72-hour mainstream media bombardment was a joke where he says Puerto Rico's a floating island of garbage.
Oh boy.
Apparently they do have some waste management issues there, but I don't think that this was the best branding that they could have had a week before this election. Now, the other argument is, the mainstream media was literally calling this a Nazi rally with like no evidence, so they probably were going to pick something that somebody said to dogpile on either way. And my evidence of this is that the garbage news cycle continues, because in the middle of Kamala Harris delivering her closing arguments, and I think she was doing a competent job of this. I was watching it. I was texting Andrew throughout saying I think she's delivering a good speech. And the cameras that they've been using in this election, as somebody who's a big camera nerd, they have been doing just like movie level cinematography on political speeches, which I think is something that deserves to be talked about in its own place at its own time, because it's just something we've not seen before. But she delivers this speech.
Well, hold on there. You were talking about Nazis earlier. The Nazis were pretty good at that cinematography stuff, were they not? Anyway.
Yeah,
continue.
well, and I heard that Adolf Hitler drinks water, and so does Donald Trump. So he must be Hitler. But Kamala's delivering this speech. I think, was it the best speech that any U.S. politician's ever delivered? No, but was it what she needed to deliver that night to have a strong chance of closing this race favorably? Yes, it was. Unfortunately, in the middle of this speech, she didn't even get off the stage. Joe Biden is doing a virtual fundraiser with Latinos, and he says, all the Puerto Ricans aren't garbage. The only garbage I see are Trump's supporters.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so he just, had a deplorable Hillary Clinton style moment. It's one thing that is very clear that we've seen in multiple election cycles is that insulting the whole electorate of the other side is just never a good political decision. Because one, they pulled the wind out of the Puerto Rican garbage news cycle, and two, prevent Harris from having a news cycle about her closing arguments. Yeah. And she has not been keeping up the tempo of campaign events that we see the Trump Vance team doing. So for her to reclaim that narrative message between, the garbage comments and election day, I haven't seen her do it in the last 24 hours, and I don't know if she's going to get it in the last 48.
Well, Dylan, it's also very interesting you mentioned that timing of Joe Biden making those remarks at the very moment that she was giving that important closing argument speech. Let's rewind the tape a few weeks ago. Kamala Harris preparing to take the stage for an important rally in the state of Michigan, a state where she absolutely has to win. And Joe Biden comes on in the White House press room just as she's taking the stage and says, oh, by the way, everything that she's saying she's against, she was interlocked with my administration, an integral part. I mean, Dylan, I got to ask at this point, based on the timing alone of these Biden comments, is he trying to tank her?
The first time you asked me this question on air, I was like, I don't know. He's kind of old up there in the years, but I think this is like the third or fourth time now throughout this campaign cycle that you've pitched me this exact same question. And you really do have to start scratching your head when your own, former running mate is knifing you. I mean, maybe he's just incompetent. I would actually believe that because of just some of the stuff that we've seen completely unrelated to Harris where he's made similar level of gaffes. I mean, for crying out loud, he said that Barack Obama was the first black politician to be like educated and able to speak. This is a guy who's known to put his foot in his own mouth. And this was before he went senile. So would it surprise me if it's just him gaffing? Not at all. But I think a lot of people believe that he did not want to be removed from office. The situation where he fell ill in Nevada and then was flown across the country and wasn't seen by anybody for about a week and emerged from his basement in Delaware, no longer running for president after making an announcement that wasn't on official letterhead, not endorsing Harris, only to endorse her on Twitter 12 minutes later. That whole situation reeks of his hand being forced. Now, I think that there's going to be a great book or a great movie about this, what effectively was a coup, at some point in time in the future, if the media will allow that to get through the censors there. But the idea that he might be prodding and taking pot shots while he still is the most powerful man in the world, because you can't say he's not. He could initiate a world war right now if he wanted to. He's still the president of the United States with all the authorities that accompany that role.
So the leader of the free world is either trolling his own vice president or blissfully unaware of where he is and what he's doing.
That's 2024 for you, isn't it?
What a wonderful scenario. Well, we are going to dig into all this stuff on election night. I mentioned a moment ago, we've got a special guest coming in the studio tomorrow who we're going to interview about the 2024 election, the state of the race. We've also got some special guests lined up for our live election night coverage. Again, don't want to give too much away just yet, but it's going to be an amazing broadcast. Dylan, you've been putting a lot of work into it. I'm very excited to join you on election night. We would encourage everybody who is tracking this race, and also folks in South Carolina who want to know how the local races are going. There's not a lot happening in South Carolina this year. There's no statewide elections on the ballot, and there are also no competitive congressional races, unlike in years past. So kind of a slow night here in South Carolina, at least as far as state races go. But we do have some Senate races, which could impact some legislative priorities in the upcoming legislative session. We'll report on that. But again, all eyes on the race for the White House. Dylan Nolan and our special guest will be joined live for that broadcast starting here on Tuesday evening. All right. We will keep everybody posted. I want to thank everybody for tuning in this week. I want to thank Dylan for helping run this show. Jen, Andy, Callie, excellent work. And we will catch everybody next time on the Fitz News Month in Review.